Michael Harrison stood frozen in the doorway of his mahogany-paneled study, briefcase still in hand. The sight before him should have filled him with alarm. His three sons, James, Lucas, and Henry, were standing barefoot on his antique conference table, their matching red polo shirts bright against the warm wood tones of the room. But that wasn't what held him motionless. It was the joy on their faces. The boys were 6 years old, and Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd seen them smile like that. Not since the accident that had taken their hearing 2 years ago. Not since their mother had walked out 6 months later, unable to cope with what she called the burden of damaged children. Those words still cut him deeply. Standing beside the table was Elena Martinez, the new housekeeper he'd hired just 3 weeks ago. She wore her orange and white uniform, her dark hair pulled back neatly. Her hands moved in graceful, flowing patterns as she signed to the boys, and they were laughing, actually laughing. The sound was different, the way deaf children laugh, but it was pure and unfiltered and beautiful. Elena was teaching them to dance. Michael watched as she showed them how to feel the vibrations from the large speaker system he kept in his study. The purple lights on the speakers pulsed with the bass. She placed their small hands on the wood of the table, helping them sense the rhythm through their feet, through their fingertips. Then she signed something, and all three boys began to move in unison, swaying and stepping in time to a beat only they could feel. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another business emergency, no doubt. Michael Harrison owned one of the largest tech companies on the East Coast. He was used to emergencies, but for the first time in months, he let the call go to voicemail. He must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath. Perhaps, because Elena turned suddenly. Her warm brown eyes went wide with alarm when she saw him. The boys, sensing her tension, stopped moving and turned too. Michael saw the fear flash across Elena's face. She began signing rapidly to the boys, probably telling them to get down. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached to help them. "Wait," Michael said, holding up his hand. Elena froze. The boys looked confused, their eyes darting between their father and the woman who had brought such unexpected light into their carefully ordered world. Michael set down his briefcase slowly. He walked toward them, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the Persian rug. When he reached the table, he looked up at his sons. James, the oldest by 3 minutes, had chocolate on his face. Lucas, the middle child, was missing a sock. Henry, the baby of the trio, was holding Elena's hand tightly. They were a mess. They were standing on furniture. They were breaking at least a dozen of the rules that previous housekeepers had tried so hard to enforce. They were happy. Michael felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since the day the doctors had told him his boys would never hear again, since the day his wife had looked at him with cold eyes and said she hadn't signed up for this life. "Elena," he said quietly, "could you please teach me?" She blinked. "Sir?" "The dance. Could you teach me how to dance with my sons?" He watched emotions play across her face, surprise, uncertainty, hope. Finally, she nodded. She signed something to the boys, and their faces lit up like Christmas morning. Elena stepped back and gestured for Michael to remove his suit jacket. He did, draping it over a chair. His tie followed. The boys watched with wide eyes as their usually stern father rolled up his sleeves. "The vibrations," Elena explained, her accent soft and melodic. "They feel the music through the vibrations. Here," she guided his hand to the table's surface. "Can you feel it?" Michael closed his eyes. At first there was nothing. Then slowly he began to sense it. The subtle pulse. The rhythm traveling through the solid wood. It was faint, but it was there. Elena helped him step up onto the table. The boys giggled. Actually giggled. At the sight of their dignified father standing in his stocking feet on the furniture. She showed him simple movements, swaying side to side. Stepping in time with the beat he could barely perceive, but his sons felt in their bones. And then something magical happened. James took his father's hand. Lucas took the other. Henry wrapped his arms around Michael's waist, and together, the four of them moved. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't coordinated. Michael's expensive watch caught the light as he tried to keep up with his son's movements. But they were together. For the first time in 2 years, Michael felt truly connected to his boys, not as the busy father who provided for them, not as the man who hired specialists and therapists, but as someone who was willing to enter their world, to learn their language, to dance their dance. Elena signed something, and the boys released their father's hands to sign back. Michael watched the conversation he couldn't understand, feeling a familiar frustration rise. Elena must have seen it on his face because she spoke gently. "They say you're dancing like a robot," she translated, her eyes twinkling. "But a nice robot. A daddy robot?" Michael laughed. It started as a chuckle but grew into something bigger, something that felt like it was shaking loose years of tension and fear. The boys laughed too, and Elena joined in, and suddenly the stuffy, serious study was filled with a warmth it hadn't known in far too long. When they finally climbed down from the table, carefully, Elena making sure each boy was steady, Michael felt different. Lighter somehow. He watched as Elena fussed over the boys, wiping chocolate from James's face, finding Lucas's missing sock, straightening Henry's shirt. "How did you know?" Michael asked her quietly. "About the dancing? About the vibrations?" Elena paused, her hand resting gently on Henry's shoulder. "My brother," she said simply. "He was deaf too. When we were children in El Salvador, before we came to America, our mother taught us to feel the music. She said that hearing was only one way to experience joy. There are many ways, Mr. Harrison, many ways to connect. What happened to your brother?" Her smile was sad but peaceful. "He died 5 years ago, cancer, but he lived a beautiful life. He married. He had children. He taught music to deaf students." She looked down at the triplets. "When I saw your boys that first day, so quiet, so sad, I saw my brother. I thought, maybe I can help these little ones find their joy again." Michael felt his throat tighten. "The other housekeepers," he said. "They all said the same thing, that the boys needed structure, discipline, that I was too soft, that I let them get away with too much because I felt sorry for them." "Structure is good," Elena said firmly. "Discipline is important. But joy," she shook her head. "Joy is not something we let children have as a reward. Joy is what helps them grow strong enough to face all the hard things in life." She began gathering the boys, preparing to take them upstairs for dinner. But Michael stopped her. "Elena, tomorrow could you teach me more? Not just the dancing. The signing, all of it. I want to learn how to speak with my sons." Her smile was brilliant. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, I would be honored." That night, after the boys were in bed, Michael stood in his study and looked at the table where his sons had danced. There were small footprints on the polished surface. He thought about calling the cleaning service to remove them immediately. Instead, he decided to leave them. The next morning, Michael came down to breakfast an hour earlier than usual. Elena looked surprised to see him, but she quickly set another place at the kitchen table. The boys were already there, eating pancakes shaped like animals. Michael sat down and did something he hadn't done in months. He ate breakfast with his sons. Elena signed as she spoke, teaching Michael simple words. "Good morning. Thank you. I love you." His hands felt clumsy and oversized, his gestures awkward. But the boys were patient, showing him how to shape the signs correctly, giggling when he mixed up hungry and happy. This became their new routine. Every morning, breakfast together. Every evening, Michael came home earlier, spending time with the boys before bed. And every day, Elena taught him more signs, more ways to communicate with his children. The change didn't happen overnight. There were still difficult days. Times when Michael felt frustrated by his inability to express complex thoughts to his sons. Times when the boys had tantrums that he didn't know how to handle. Times when the weight of single parenthood felt crushing. But Elena was always there, steady and patient, reminding him that love doesn't require perfection, just presence. 3 months after that day in the study, Michael came home early with a surprise. He'd contacted Elena's family in California and arranged for them to visit. When her mother and her brother's widow and 2 nieces arrived, Elena cried tears of joy. Michael had also enrolled in formal sign language classes and hired a deaf consultant at his company, creating a new accessibility division. But the biggest change came 6 months later, on the boy's 7th birthday. Michael had always thrown elaborate parties, catered affairs with hired entertainment, more for show than for the children's enjoyment. This year, he did something different. He invited the boys' classmates from their school for the deaf. He hired deaf performers who signed stories and did magic tricks. The music was played through speakers that vibrated the floors. And in the middle of it all, Michael Harrison, billionaire tech mogul, danced with his 3 sons and didn't care who saw. As Elena watched from the side, helping to serve cake and making sure every child felt included, she felt her brother's presence. She imagined him smiling, proud of the joy she'd helped bring back to these 3 beautiful boys and their father. "Thank you," Michael said to her later, after the guests had gone and the boys were asleep. "For everything. For seeing them, really seeing them, when everyone else just saw problems to solve." Elena shook her head. "They were never problems. Mr. Harrison, they were always just boys who needed someone to dance with them." And in that moment, Michael understood. The greatest gift we can give each other isn't fixing what's broken. It's celebrating what's beautiful. It's meeting people where they are and saying, "You are enough, just as you are." Years later, when James, Lucas, and Henry were grown men, they would remember that day their father came home and learned to dance. They would remember the woman in the orange uniform who taught them that silence wasn't emptiness, it was simply a different kind of music. And they would pass that lesson on to their own children, teaching them that love has many languages, and kindness speaks them all.